Hello again, everybody. Time once again for Michael's record collection. I am very excited and honored to be joined by Joel Hoekstra from Whitesnake, from Trans-Siberian Orchestra, from Revolution Saints, from so many bands. This guy knows everybody. Joel, thanks for your time tonight.
Hey, right back at you. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask you what I always ask my guests, and that is, what was your first favorite record?
AC/DC Back in Black. Yeah.
Okay, good one.
Cassette for me. Cassette. I was a cassette kid.
Sure, sure. I think a lot of us were. Some of us started with 8 tracks and moved into cassettes, but that's just the older ones of us. Now I know you came from a musical family. You learned cello and piano. Do you remember how you were first introduced to music, or was it just always there?
It was always there. I mean, my parents were, on it every day. So I grew up around music, and they had me going very early on cello and piano. And really, at that age, I was just kind of interested in playing sports. I wanted to be a baseball pitcher. That was kind of my initial when I was a kid, my dream was. And then somewhere around age 11, I think that kind of shifted for me. It's just seeing and hearing AC/DC and seeing Angus Young. And I just said, that's what I want to do right there. That guy's the coolest person I've ever seen.
Yeah. Did you get your own little British schoolboy outfit?
I didn't go that far. And I also grew quite a bit taller, I think, than I ever imagined. So I wouldn't fit in that band. But, hey, as it turns out, that's a pretty decent idol. He stood the test of time. He's still around right now. So, I'm sure his presence and his playing resonated with many people.
Yeah. Now, you've grown up and you're a professional musician. Your guitar playing and Angus's, you don't have anywhere close to the same tone. You play different style, stylistically. Um, who are some of the other guitarists that kind of helped shape what you've become?
Yeah, early going, it was very like heavy metal based, like that AC/DC, Black Sabbath, Ozzy, Iron Maiden, Scorpions. Those are kind of the early favorites. And then that kind of evolved in different directions. I'd say like getting into some of the more stereotypical 80s bands, like Dokken was big for me. Queensryche, I was introduced to Queensryche on like the EP. Someone had given that to me and like still in, I think, seventh or eighth grade. And so I followed them kind of all the way through Empire, and then I kind of lost. But, I really obsessed on them a lot. And I'd say Rush for me, probably number one of all time. Once I stopped obsessing so much on heavy metal and kind of more on like the skill of the band and everything like that, Rush really resonated with me. The Yes, in particular, the Trevor Rabin stuff, that's like the progressive side. And then, classic bands. Classic rock was really big in Chicago where I grew up. There was a couple great stations, The Loop, and we had, WMET, and we had another one that I forget that played, older stuff. It was like, 60s stuff. And so, in 70s. So I always kind of cite like my favorites from that be like Zeppelin and Pink Floyd, like the Doors. That kind of stuff was all in there. And then all those guitar records, I grew up in the guitar record era where, Yngwie came out with Rising Force and that changed the game. And
Yeah.
I would say, throw in there the Satriani and Steve Vai and Steve Morse was a good one for, all the different styles. Steve had those records like High Tension Wires that were kind of like acoustic driven, or like there would be like kind of a countryish track on, I had Steve Morse band, The Introduction, and I wore that one out. So all that stuff, then kind of coupled with, I mean, there's a lot. For me to name everything would take a really long time. But I would say all that stuff kind of mash it all together and you get an idea. But you notice, like with me, when I name it, I name like the bands. Like when we go back to the heavy metal era, I wasn't even talking about Randy Rhoads. I was talking about Ozzy. I liked the Ozzy cassette. This is before I really was cared about like, you know, oh, Randy Rhoads solo in that. I was like, it was more about the Ozzy album, the Blizzard of Oz,
Yeah.
was, cool and Black Sabbath, it was about the songs. It wasn't about like Tony Iommi for me. It was so I cared more about like the bands themselves and the individual players.
Sure. Okay. Now we're here to talk about Joel Hoekstra's 13. You got a new album coming out June 16th called Crash of Life on Frontiers Music. Before we dive into sort of some of the album specifics, there are multiple artists, and if you go to Joel's webpage and look at all the people he's worked with, it would take the rest of the time we have to list all of the legends that this guy has performed with or recorded with. But there's a few that I have just sort of wanted to get some background on. And the first of those is Night Ranger. Big Night Ranger fan. How was it working with Brad Gillis in a band that features that two guitar attack like that?
Yeah, cool. I mean, in between Jeff's departure from the band and my hiring, there was a year with Reb Beach in there where I think, Reb was kind of in there doing the super strat thing with the Floyd Rose himself. And I was like, well, the whole thing that was so cool about the Watson Gillis dynamic was you knew immediately it was Brad Gillis, because you'd hear the whammy. And
Mm-hmm.
even on that Stars recording, I don't know how many people out there remember the Hearing Aid recording of We're Stars, but
Oh yeah.
the people that really stood out, who you could know immediately on there, were Yngwie and Brad, because Brad was doing something completely different, doing all the whammy bar stuff. So, I always looked at that joining Night Ranger like it was really easy to fit in a two guitar team with Brad. You just give him that, and just go like, hey, I'm going to play a Les Paul. We don't need to worry about everybody's gonna know who's who immediately. Brad's very identifiable because of that. I always looked at him as kind of a more heavy metal version of what Jeff Beck was doing with the whammy. More of a Brad to me is more of a lyrical player than a shredder chops guy. He gets thrown in that shredder category because I think he stepped into the Ozzy gig. But to me, Brad's strength has always been all those, his solos sing, we listen to that Sister Christian solo and it sings, like, so his signature stuff, I think it was really easy to be in a two guitar team with him because he's got a really strong identity.
So you were there from 2008 to 2014. How did you first get in Night Ranger? How did the introductions
Yeah.
take place? How did that work?
Well, I'd been working in the house band for Jim Peterick for his World Stage Band in the Chicago area for years, where people would come in and sing their hits. And Kelly Kagi, their Night Rangers drummer, was a part of that every year. So I'd see him like once a year. We had known each other for 7 years before I even had the opportunity to play with Night Ranger. And Reb needed to miss a gig. I think it was probably because Winger had a show. And so I think they were looking at like, hey, we either cancel this date or what do we do? Play one guitar? And Kelly said, no, I know this guy that plays with Jim Peterick, that this guy gets off a plane and he knows like a whole set. You don't have to rehearse him. He plays the show down. He does Jeff's 8-finger thing. And so that kind of became my opportunity. So it was really a gig where I just, we met in baggage claim. I was like, hi, how you doing? We're playing tomorrow night together. So I did a gig with him and that went well. And that kind of eventually led to playing with the band full time.
2018 to 2020, you went on tour with Cher for the Here We Go Again tour. How does Joel Hoekstra become Cher's guitarist?
Well, that was really, I would say, more 2017 through 19. David Coverdale was having knee replacement surgery done in 2017. So I didn't really need a new gig per se because, Whitesnake was still functional. We were just going to, David was just going to not tour that year. So I just reached out to all my friends in the business and like, hey, if anybody needs a fill-in type of thing, I don't really need a new gig. And just so happened my friend Justin Derrico is one of those people. He plays with Pink. People would know him from there on the TV show The Voice. And the other guitarist on The Voice, Dave Barry, was Cher's longtime guitarist. And he was kind of angsty and going, man, I need to find a sub for Cher because I'm going to be missing a lot of dates. The Voice was really getting busy. And Justin said, I know this is kind of a weird suggestion out of left field, but how about, Joel Hoekstra from Whitesnake, because he's played a lot of different styles of music too, and can, probably be able to cop all the styles. And so it started out as like just kind of going in for a few shows, and that really kind of turned into a few years, just kind of out of the blue. It's like life is weird that way. And so that, yeah, ended up being something that I was just going to hop in for a little tiny bit, and ended up being kind of long.
One of the things you're very well known for is being in Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Again, how did you come to join that band and do some of the great things that those guys do? Especially, of course, we all know the Christmas time stuff. That's the time to go and see Trans-Siberian Orchestra. What interested you about the gig, and how did you get it?
That was really Alex Skolnick needed to take a year off to tour with his jazz trio. And I had a couple friends in the band throw my name in and say, "This is your guy." So I auditioned with Al Petrelli, the music director, first, and that went well. And then I ended up having an audition with Paul O'Neill, the founder and owner, and the late great Paul O'Neill, and that went well. And I got offered the gig. So I really wasn't quite sure at that time, is this like 1 year filling in for Alex? That had happened previously, I think in like 2003. He had taken a year off, I want to say it was. And so I thought maybe this will just be 1 year. But it ended up kind of sticking. And, now I'm going on like 13 years of being a part of TSO. I mean, there's a lot of great things about TSO to ask me about the gig, but yeah, just a great pool of talent in Trans-Siberian Orchestra, and obviously the production is amazing. The light show and lasers and pyro, and just to be a part of that spectacle, and it's something that any musician would be really lucky to have the opportunity.
Okay, well, that brings me to Whitesnake. It seems like you've played in and listened to bands that were influential to Whitesnake, that people from Whitesnake might have even been in it at times. So it seems like a natural fit. But what was the first phone call? What was the first contact with Whitesnake?
Yeah, well, I mean, once again, a situation where Doug was stepping away. So just trying to get an audition. I was really, bird. I was like right on that, trying to get myself an audition. Are we frozen again here?
I can hear you, but yeah, you
My
stuck for a
goodness, I'm
second,
so
but you're
sorry.
no, that's no
Um,
problem. This happens.
so I think, initially I gave some video links of, me playing with Night Ranger and me on that metal show to Reb to pass on to David, because Reb and I had known each other from that Night Ranger experience.
Hmm.
And at first I didn't hear anything back. And then I just kind of went further into my brain, like, come on, who could get me an audition? And Phil Carson, who manages Foreigner, came to mind, because I'd filled in for Mick Jones. And Phil also managed Dee Snider. He was around Rock of Ages a lot, because Dee was a part of the show for a bit.
Hmm.
So Phil was nice enough to write David and get me an audition.
Mm. Um, all right. So you're in Rock of Ages as a Broadway guitarist. That's probably something you never imagined yourself doing.
Absolutely. That along with Cher are totally out of left field. When I was a 11-year-old kid playing Tony Iommi riffs, I wasn't thinking about, someday I'm going to be on Broadway, or someday I'm going to play with Cher. So I'm definitely out of left field, but I had moved to New York to do rock theater. I was doing a show about Janis Joplin called Love Janis. And then that director took me on the road with that to regional theaters. And then he had another production called It Ain't Nothing But the Blues. That was a traditional blues show that I went on the road with, and did that. And then I started to sub for my friend in the pits. And so I would learn, like, the books, the sheet music. And it was really through doing that, oddly enough, that led me to Rock of Ages, because I had subbed for him on whatever show he was doing. At that time, I would learn the book. And as it turns out, the keyboard player on the last show I did with him, sub for him, it was called Tarzan, that Phil Collins wrote the music for.
Hmm.
And the keyboard player from that gig got the music supervisor role for Rock of Ages and remembered, hey, I remember there being this rock guy um, at Tarzan, and like maybe let's get in touch with him. And when he did, I had joined Night Ranger, and he said, well, this is going to be amazing because Sister Christian is in the show, and it's an '80s rock show, and so it was just this beautiful, I guess, kind of coincidence that occurred, that like I had joined Night Ranger and their song was in the show. So that made those guys happy. And I was promoting them on Broadway and they made, making a movie out of it and whatnot and all that excitement. So,
Yeah. And you got to have a cameo in the movie. What was that like for you?
um, I mean, I wasn't a big fan of the movie. I think that kind of ruined the show was a lot more fun and a lot cooler, but like
Hmm.
it was life experience wise, it was great because that 3 days we shot in Miami, I basically shared a trailer with Nuno and Sebastian Bach and Kevin Cronin from REO. And Debbie Gibson was a part of our pack as well, but she had her own trailer, obviously, or, was with females. But, palling around with them for 3 days, that was a great life experience, lots of fun,
Yeah.
got some great stories out of it. And so, yeah.
All right. So we're here to talk about Crash of Life. Tell me about Joel Hoekstra's 13. The when you started this project, you had done some solo albums before, instrumental stuff and that kind of thing. Did you already have in mind what kind of music you wanted to do, or did that kind of come later?
Kind of based on the personnel. I mean, the idea of doing a rock record was because my instrumental albums were kind of before things took off for me in the '80s resurgence. So I was kind of making like I guess what you call rock fusion instrumental albums, and then an acoustic album that was all instrumental. And so we almost you describe as easy listening. And then when everything started to take off, joining Night Ranger, having Rock of Ages, TSO, Whitesnake, all the fans were like, they'd research the solo albums. They'd go, what gives? Like, how come you don't have any rock records out? And I was like, I guess now's the time for me to start doing that because I'd always wanted to, be like, hey, someday I'll make my rock records too. I gave it a project name because I wanted it to sound like a band more than like a guitar album. It didn't really interest me to do like let me just have a throwaway song with a fancy guitar solo or a 3-minute guitar solo in the middle. I wanted albums that were about the songs and the stuff that got me into that style of music. As I said, that's really what I was more about when I was drawn into this music. I wasn't drawn into the '80s hard rock, just because of the guitar solo. It was the song. So
Mhm.
the hitch being on this is that I do all the writing. So I write the lyrics and the vocal melodies and everything and get the final ISO on the mix and the artwork, etc. So you can't really tell, and the guys get to play whatever they want on it in terms of their, the way they interpret things. But if you're going to call it a band, you got to write with people. And I counted one opportunity to just have it be my stuff. And that's what these albums are, is my opportunity to do all the writing and kind of be the boss for a second. Not that, I'm cool with not being the boss too. Trust me, it's a lot more work to make the Joel Hoekstra's 13 albums than the other projects that I'm a part of or bands.
Yeah. Now and one of those bands is Revolution Saints. I talked to Dean Castronova just a few weeks ago. You just had that album come out, so it's been a busy year for you in terms of releases. This is the third Joel Hoekstra 13 album, scheduled to drop June 16th. It's only 1 day shy of a full year since your album with Iconic came out last year.
Oh, okay. All right, right on. Yeah, so Revolution Saints is something that Eagle Flight came out April 21st. So those that want to check that out, that's, something that honored to be asked to join in with Dean Castronova and Jeff Pilson to continue on that brand that obviously Doug Aldrich and Jack Blades had started, and they just kind of felt it was time for them to step away once again. So getting asked to do that, I just want to make sure everything was cool and that, with Doug and all that stuff, Doug and I actually, have a good relationship. So I just kind of checked in with him and said, hey, what's up? Are you really stepping aside? You don't want to do this? And he said, no, I actually recommended them. They get you to continue it if they want to keep it going. So all right, well, that solves that problem. And so at that point in time, it comes down to like, you're a guitarist and you get an opportunity to work with Dean Castronovo and Jeff Pilson. The answer is yes. Now Iconic was interesting because that was something where Michael Sweet and I had been talking for a long time about doing a record together. And Nathan James was a singer that I had not only been a part of TSO with, but also had kind of co-written some of the tracks on the Inglorious records. So I think at Frontiers, they wanted to put them around Nathan. They said, why don't we take this opportunity to put these two ideas together? Let's take Michael Sweet and Joel, and let's put them with Nathan. Michael could be more of a guitarist and maybe sing some lines here and there, but maybe be more of primarily a guitarist in this thing. And they kind of said, and when I signed the deal, it was like, and then we'll worry about the drummer and bass player later. And then much to my surprise, later on, that turned out to be Tommy Aldridge and Marco Mendoza, because I went, oh, so I get it. Now we're throwing this huge Whitesnake vibe at it. But it's a cool project. That one's very collaborative in the way we go about the writing. I write the guitar riffs unarranged for Michael. And then this is how he works with George Lynch as well. On their records, and then Michael arranges them and adds or subtracts as needed, and then that goes out goes to Nathan and Alessandro Del Vecchio to write the lyrics and vocal melodies. So you kind of got about 4 people doing the writing on that. It's always, to me, it's fun to have those collaborative efforts too and get different results. And you hear like, hey, maybe if I was hearing it this happening this way, but it's also cool to go with the energy of other people and their visions, and be open-minded to it and see what you get. Hence chemistry, right?
Yeah.
You fall back on whether or not there's like musical chemistry there.
Yeah. One of the great things about Frontiers is that if there's a musician that I like that gets involved with something from Frontiers, then I could probably count on them being on a bunch of more albums on Frontiers from that point on. It just kind of seems like a big brotherhood.
Yeah, I mean, for as much flack as they take, that I shudder to think like what the scene would be like without them. I mean, they really are responsible for keeping a lot of the this genre of music alive and out there, and giving us all a platform. So I think we're having another freeze. But no, I gave up quickly. So I'm very grateful to Serafino and Mario, and I've been working with them since the first Night Ranger record that I recorded, somewhere in California. So we've been working together 12 years or something now. So, we got a good rapport, and I think that's part of them asking me to be a part of Revolution Saints and Iconic, and we're really with Joel Hoekstra's 13 kind of giving me artistic freedom and just going, look, we know you're going to give us something good. Just do your thing, man, So that's really how they approached this new one, Crash of Life. They were very just like, hey, just make a cool album, man, just do your thing, and so I appreciate that.
Crash of Life, you got the same lineup almost for this album. Vinny Appice on drums, Tony Franklin on bass, Derek Sherinian on keyboards, and Jeff Scott Soto doing some backing vocals. But you have a new lead vocalist for this album. It's not Russell Allen this time out. It's Girish Pradhan. I hope I'm pronouncing his name somewhat correctly from Girish and the Chronicles. A great up and coming band in their own right. How did that happen? Did Russell have other projects? He was too busy, or did he just need to step away? Or but how did you go from Russell to Girish?
Yeah, I think, just like Russell's schedule and how long it takes him to complete records. So Running Games was like a serious wait in terms of actually getting vocal tracks from him. And with Russ, if he's not like a part of a band, he doesn't really want to do like videos and support the record and things like that. So he wants to be a part of like the writing and have it be a band if he's going to put his like stamp on it in terms of doing videos. So in discussing all this with Frontiers and like what to do, they kind of sent me a video of Girish and his band, and I thought, well, he's obviously great, but his I would liken his style on that stuff to a little bit more of like early Skid Row, lots of high screaming, and I thought that's cool. The sound of this stuff has been a little bit more like Ronnie James Dio on the heavy side, Lou Gramm, Paul Rogers on the mellower side. So like, you know, yeah, let me send him stuff and see how he does. And as it turns out, you know, he's really, really versatile and a real chameleon. And he really did an amazing job on the album. Some of the best vocal performances are ones where he's never utilizing the high scream or anything like that. And he just sang amazingly. So he's very, very talented and you know, very happy to have him on board.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed when I was listening to Running Games and the new one, sort of A B, uh, to see what stylistically had changed, his his style was not too dissimilar to where it would be jarring to play one song and then the one song from one album and then the one from the new album. He's kind of very similar to Russell, or at least he pulls off that on this record.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that the range is a bit higher with Girish. Russ is that, you know, real full, almost he's almost more of a baritone these days, you know. Russ has never really been a high screamer, etc., you know. He just has a killer tone and great feel, you know, and yeah, so I had written thinking, okay, Girish is singing, so some of the melodies go to higher notes than Russ would sing. So some of the range of like what the vocal melodies are changes. Um, but in general, I mean, I'm kind of spoiled because you're talking about two world-class singers here. I mean, anytime we're comparing guys like this, we're comparing like really the best rock singers that there are out there. And so, you know, it's no disrespect to anybody, and it's apples and oranges. It's up to the fans what they prefer.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, the Girish is definitely world class, and so is Russ. So, you know, as long as the album quality is there for me, and it fits in the vein of the style, I didn't want to have a total departure and have the round completely different than Running Games. I think, you know, having that core lineup intact with Vinny and Tony and Derek Sherinian and Jeff Scott Soto doing the backing vocals, which is an amazing favor that he does for me, you know. He wouldn't do that for just anyone. I think we just have a good friendship, and, you know, he lends his hand on that. So that gives the record a sound, having somebody like Jeff just be like, I'll do the backing vocals on your album. I mean, that's a serious luxury, man, when you got Jeff Scott Soto singing backing vocals. So all of the
Absolutely.
stuff we're talking about is kind of like really great, very talented people. There's never a slight on anybody. It just is, you know, there's, you know, these guys are all great.
Yeah, fantastic. So the new album is really great. What I wanted to know about your songwriting style is, where does a Joel Hoekstra's 13 songs start? Do you start with a melody on the guitar? Do you write on the piano? Do you start with maybe some lyrics?
I'd say almost all of these started with riffs, you know, guitar riffs, and some of them had been for past writing attempts. Oddly enough, some of it with Russell, because we were talking about starting a band that was going to be like a little more like classic rock, like Don't Have Words is something that I wrote for Russell. It was kind of like AC/DC influenced, but with more of a pop chorus to it,
Mm-hmm.
pop-ish, like kind of melodic rock chorus. And so there's an example. Or You're Right for Me is another one that's kind of like open tuning, Jimmy Page kind of vibe for me, in terms of where I was writing that song from. But again, with a poppier chorus. So most of it was guitar, but like a song like Through the Night, which is like more of like, I suppose, like almost R&B-ish kind of changes on it, was all the ballads kind of take interesting turns on this album. They're like ballads for a bit and then they're not. It's like Torn Into
Yeah.
Lies, which is a single that's up right now. It's like a ballad, but it also kind of breaks off into a jam, you know? Um, so I would say that Through the Night was one that was melody first, me singing it in my head, walking and kind of writing, like, you know, and then figuring out what are the changes when I got to my guitar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Through the Night is, I was going to ask you specifically about that because stylistically it's a bit different than the other songs on the album.
Yeah, it's kind of got almost like smooth rock changes to it, but then gridded out with distortion and heavied up a bit, you know. So it's kind of an interesting experiment. to
Yeah.
see if like that works with people or not, But I like that on this record that a lot of my different influences are present, and it's like I can almost go riff by riff or moment to moment in a solo and tell you like that's where this comes from with me.
Hmm.
Um, like Far Too Deep, which was the first single that's up. The opening riff is almost George Lynch influenced, kind of Dokken influenced. Then the verse riff, which is almost like Megadeth's Symphony for Destruction kind of influence. And then the chorus, for me, the guitar riff itself came almost from like Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, kind of having this D minor, like 2-note power chord kind of riff. And so the pre-chorus is definitely like Soundgarden influence. It's like a 90s riff. It's a drop D, kind of working with the parallel power chords like this when you're drop D tuned on guitar. So, I can pick apart all these different songs and kind of break down for you where the influences come from. But it's fun for me to have the record reflect a lot of that rather than have 11 or 12 songs that sound the same. That's not
Hmm.
as fun for me, especially when these albums are made as artistic expression for me. So I like to have, not to use the key word of nowadays, but a lot of diversity on it. It's like to have different styles represented is fun for me. And then when you take the same musicians performing it in the same tones and using essentially the same guitar the whole time, a Les Paul, the stuff, it gives it some glue and it makes it sound like the stuff belongs together, not like, oh, this is just totally out of place,
Hmm.
So it finds a happy middle ground with that.
Lyrically, when you write a song, do you write your demo and then do scat lyrics and then figure out what you want to say later? Do you come in with an idea in your head that you want to say, something that you really want to get off your chest? What is your approach to lyrics?
Lyrics and vocal melodies kind of happen simultaneously, and they happen in a segment usually where even if something has a certain section and I'll say, well, I know what that one's going to be already, but I'll usually designate, all right, now it's time to sit down and write the lyrics. And then I actually track a guide vocal through the whole record for the singer where I sing the whole album, and then they just can reference that and sing it a whole lot better than I do. Or sometimes put their own twist on it. Russell did a lot more of like doing his own thing with it. Girish followed a lot of what I did on the guide, in terms of what the actual melody or the ideas were like riff wise. But yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's a lot more work. Like I got to write all the lyrics and then sing the whole album, just have it essentially erased eventually.
Mm-hmm.
So I put in a lot of work on these records for sure. They're much more difficult to make than the other projects we're speaking about.
So would you say it's a matter of um, writing lyrics that fit the melody you want, or like is there ever a thought that you want to get out there, or I'm just trying to wrap my head around your process. So like tell me if does the again like I go back to the scat vocals, but you're telling me that it comes together at the same time. So does it just
Yeah,
come to you in the moment?
yeah, just comes to me in the moment. And
Yeah.
I'll usually have a guitar in my hands if I want to, like, sometimes I can inspire a vocal idea off of a guitar. If I play something that would be like scale related to a guitar, and I'll go, oh, normally a vocalist wouldn't think to sing those notes. And then that's actually kind of neat. And then other times it's just vocals only, and I wouldn't be even aware necessarily, like, oh, that's here on the guitar what I'm singing. Um, so yeah, a variety of those things. It all kind of comes together at the same time.
Hmm. Now the second single that came out was "Torn into Lies." That's one of those partial ballads that kind of
Yeah, veers
does its
off.
own thing. Yeah. Um, when you work with Frontiers, do they select the singles that they want? Do they get your input? How does that work?
Well, I think on the first two albums, there were kind of the poppy ones that stood out. So it was like on Dying to Live, there was Until I Left You, and everybody was like, well, that's the single. And I was like, okay, yes, but let's pick out some heavier ones too, so people don't think it's all just kind of melodic, super melodic, because that song was not very heavy.
Hmm.
And then really same with Running Games with like Hard to Say Goodbye. That stood out as like a melody first song. And this album, I would say, is a little bit more Less obvious what the standalone singles are, but I'd say the overall bar is raised as far as like the songs for me, at least. I feel like in these interviews that I've done now, I've literally had every single song cited as a favorite of somebody when they list their favorites off the record. So I've had at one time or another every single one mentioned, which is either a good sign or a bad sign because it just means like nothing's really standing out as like, well, these are the obvious singles. So I think the thought of having Far Too Deep and Torn Into Lies was like, well, let's represent one of the really heavy tracks and let's represent one of the more ballady tracks. And, people can usually, most of the stuff falls between those two things. So.
Sure. Let me ask you, I froze for a minute. Maybe you didn't hear me. But what is your favorite song on this album?
I don't have one. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. I mean, that's perfectly fine. I know a lot of people, it's like they're all my children and I love them equally kind of thing.
Yeah.
But
how it is.
Yeah. So it's a luxury too when you have a world-class guitar player that wants to put their solos in, to have a keyboard player like Derek Sherinian who also can solo with the best of them. And one of the best songs on this album for me is Not Tonight, because I love that really strong solo that Derek has that immediately followed by your melodic guitar solo. Is that something that you had baked into that demo to begin with, or did Derek have some ideas and kind of flesh that out on his own?
I kind of picked the spots and tell Derek like solo here, and a lot of times he's soloing over like on this record like sections like right before my guitar solo when it's just the gangs of Far Too Deep. He's actually shredding over that. And I said that'd be fine. I'd be gang vocals during the keyboard solo, just shred away in there. And so we just kind of pick where he can take his solos and get his licks in. And yeah, that Not Tonight is another interesting one because I think you could take like riff A, the setup for that, and go, well, that's kind of Zeppelin-y or Whitesnake-y, that kind of bluesy riff with the space. And then that chorus in particular, I would look at as like something that I could almost hear Don Dokken singing like back in the 80s, like if you listen to the melody of it and go like, this almost like has like a Dokken-ish kind of melody to it. So you hear a lot of my influences kind of poke through in weird spots, and you mash those two things together, kind of a Zeppelin / Whitesnake-ish riff with a Dokken-ish chorus, and you end up with a song like that,
Yeah. So Joel, when somebody buys this album and they put the CD in, turn it up, listen to it start to finish, what do you hope that they take away from that experience?
Well, I mean, I hope they dig it. I mean, obviously, I hope people like it. I put the stuff out mainly as an artistic statement, like, part of my legacy, if you will, not to be too self-important, but like, it'd be nice to be known as a guy who had more than some cool gigs. Like, oh yeah, that guy had this gig and this gig and this gig. It's like good to have your own music out and, yeah, have your own artistic statements out there. So that's really what the albums are about in the end for me. So, it's not necessarily about like whether or not how popular it is or anything like that. I have no delusions of grandeur of like I'm going to be on the charts or anything like that. But as if people, obviously if they like it, that's great. The more people that like it, the better. But it's not necessarily why they're made either.
All right. Well, the album comes out June 16th. It's called Crash of Life on Frontiers Music. You can get it at the Frontiers shop. You can probably get that on Amazon too. You can visit joelhoekstra.com to find out more about Joel and his phenomenal resume. Joel, it's been fantastic talking to you about this record. I really appreciate it. I wish you nothing but the best of luck with it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it so much. I'm really sorry about our connectivity issues here. Hopefully the editing isn't too painful, brother. I'm really sorry.
No worries. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.